So we can record the talk. We usually post these talks a little while down the road on our YouTube channel. So if your friends had to miss it, or if you have to scoot out early of the talk, then no worries, you can catch up with it in a couple of weeks when we post it on the Fleet YouTube channel. We have a number of live events that we posted on YouTube, so if you're interested in looking at more talks and see what we've done in the past, if this is your first time joining us, then you might want to look on our YouTube channel to see what else you might have missed. Lots of resources for you to stay engaged in science and have some fun with us with science. We had all sorts of topics, and we're excited that technology lets us do it. Yay, thanks science and technology for still giving us a life in quarantine. Maybe not quite the life we're used to, but it does have some perks to it. And if you would like to support the Fleet further, then I'm going to put our little donate link in the chat, just so that everybody knows. We appreciate it very much. I'm going to just type that real quick. Give me just 1 second. Perfect. There we go. Put that in the link. We really appreciate all the love in forms of kind words, comments on our social media platforms, encouraging thumbs up when we do something good, or any other support you can give us. We highly appreciate it. We got a question of whether we would be interested in a talk about a laser processing scientist. Sure, I always love to get connected to our science community. So if there is a connection you would like to make, I'm going to put my email in the chat. You are welcome to email me at adultprograms@rhfleet.org. There we go. So if you have somebody, if you have some topics you'd like to see, you're welcome to email those to me. You're welcome to put them in the chat. That helps us to make sure we bring the science to you that is meaningful to you. There's lots of great things in San Diego in the science world, but we want to make sure that what we bring to you is what you would like to talk about or learn about or hear about. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. It's great that we get more connections from our audience. And I very much appreciate your patience as we wait for, there she is, ta-da! Okay, I have to ask you to unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yes, now we can hear you. Wonderful.
I'm so sorry, guys. All right, I'm here.
No, it's very kind of you to make that work. We got our wires crossed with the timing a little bit, so I'm very grateful to Toniann for making it work, and for the audience for being so wonderful and patient.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for bearing with me. Sorry.
Perfect. So Toniann, I gave a little bit of an overview of what you did. A very not good one. So if you want to introduce yourself and then just go right into your talk, that would be fantastic.
Okay, thanks. Hi guys, I'm Toniann Rebick. I work for San Diego Police Department in the crime lab. I'm a criminalist. I've been in forensics for about 16 years. My first 6 were at Oceanside PD. I was mostly processed crime scenes, so collected fingerprints, took photographs, DNA swabs, things like that. I was also a latent print examiner, worked in computer forensics, and some digital video enhancement stuff for Oceanside PD. And then 10 years ago, I went over to San Diego PD. I'm a criminalist. My specialty is in firearms, and I'm also a crime scene reconstructionist. So I do shooting, reconstruction and blood spatter, do some chemical tests for blood and semen. And actually just 2 weeks ago, I promoted to the DNA supervisor. So I am still learning on that. It's a brand new thing. Even though my background, thank you, is in genetics, it's 20 years old. So I'm definitely trying to update my knowledge right now for that. But if you have any questions, I will do my best to answer them. Anyway, what I had today, I was debating, normally I do something that's a little bit more like, oh, this is what forensics is, but since you guys are scientists, I figured I'd go a little bit more sciencey and give you a presentation about some of, and call it Beyond Comparison, and it's a presentation I've done for some of our professional organizations, basically combining my two loves of firearms examination and crime scene reconstruction to tell you what firearms evidence can say about a crime scene. And I thought it would be kind of an interesting talk. So
Yep.
now that I've delayed you guys for so long, I'm going to try to pull up my screen and show you my PowerPoint.
Thank you.
Thanks. Here we go. Let me get it. Come on, let's start from the beginning. There we go. Can you guys see it? Am I good?
Yes, you're good.
All right. So, beyond comparison, what firearms evidence can tell you about your crime scene. So, when I talk about crime scenes, forensics is really interesting. If we're talking about strictly lab type forensics, fingerprint and DNA, bullet from a firearm, we always want to try to get, even though we can't technically say, yes, it is absolutely this person and no other person, or it's absolutely this gun and no other gun. We never quite go there because scientifically we can't completely prove that, but we're always trying to push towards the as close to absolute certainty as we possibly can. Or, the stats for DNA, or, I should know this officially now, but but it's like, oh, the odds of it being anybody else are 1 in a kabillion trillion, whatever, all these crazy stats that are so, the odds are so small against it being another person that there haven't been enough people existing in the history of the world to randomly have another person come up with that DNA. That's the kind of stats that we're looking at. When we get to a crime scene, it's actually totally different. We're just looking at something called a limited universe, meaning that there's only so many possibilities. For example, if you had the killer came into a room, there's a door and a window. Those are really the only 2 possible ways that they came in there, right? Unless they busted, unless you have a hole through the wall or something, there's only 2 choices. So in this limited universe, if you can rule out one thing, you can say, well, it most likely is the other. So crime scene reconstruction in a weird way is different from the lab work, because we're trying to not just say what can happen, but we're also just trying to say what couldn't happen. And actually, before I get onto that, I'm going to give a little thing that if you've heard me speak before, it's one of my favorite analogies about crime scene reconstruction, and just tell you a little bit about what crime scene reconstruction is. Crime scene reconstruction is about using science to tell a story. And the problem is it's not a complete story. Everyone wants, this whole story about oh, this person came in and they said this and they said that, and then they got into a fight and then this happened. I can't say that. All I can say are little frozen excerpts in time. The gun was at this location at the time that it was fired. The victim was in this position at the time that they were struck. Little bits. So I always use the analogy of if you're looking at your favorite, my brain's going, like you're looking at Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram or whatever, whatever your social media thing is that you use. And you're looking at pictures of a party that you weren't at. So if you're seeing this picture of a party, you don't really know what happened at the party, but you can see pictures of these little instances of it. So you get a general idea, but you can't tell everything. So you see this picture, you got Sky's arm around the girl, and at the second that that picture was taken, that's how they were standing, he had his arm around the girl. Now, maybe it was great, beginning of a wonderful love story, and they go on to live happily ever after. Or maybe she turned around and smacked him because she didn't want him touching her. You don't know. And I, as a crime scene reconstructionist, I don't know the parts before and after. All I can say are those little snapshots in time. So that's what we're dealing with right here. So this is kind of going into firearm stuff. I hope you guys are interested in firearms, but or have some kind of background knowledge. I'll try to explain some of the background as I go, but like I said, I didn't want to do too basic of a thing for you. So first thing I want to talk about is bullets. One of the interesting things about bullets is there's different designs. Now a bullet goes down, so travels down the barrel, goes towards someone. depending on the design, it's either has something with more modern bullets at least have like a, say, a copper jacketing that covers the nose of the bullet, so covers the front of the bullet, or it's open in the front and there's exposed lead. And so either like a full metal jacket type with the nose covered, or that hollow point has that exposed lead because the point is hollow, it's like a hole in it. What's interesting is that when you have a hollow point, the reason why they do that, why they have that exposed lead, is because they're made to open up into this, see this beautiful little flower right here of a bullet. Actually is weirdly pretty. This did not come from a body. I shot this in some water tank, but it opens up. And the idea is that the water or body, because the body is mostly water, the hydraulic effect of that water pressing in the nose of the bullet peels it open and opens it up, and it takes all that kinetic energy and it spreads it out, and it basically will slow the bullet down so that it doesn't keep going through your target and downrange. That's the point of a hollow point. It kind of keeps the bullet in the body instead of traveling far down. What's interesting for us for crime scenes is that we're going to look at this, and if I see a bullet like this that's expanded at a crime scene, I automatically know that this went through some kind of liquid. Now, if you have a fish tank that got shot out, that could be a possibility. But other than that, what you're probably talking about is a bullet that went through the body if it opened up, because that's your most typical source of a liquid at a crime scene is the body. So if I have multiple bullets and maybe even multiple shooters, but I find the bullet that looks like this and I have a victim with an injury, this is most likely the bullet that went through their body. I can actually swab it for DNA and prove that it was the bullet that went through their body. But sometimes they don't expand. So this is something that actually ends up baffling people. And the reason being is that because of this design. So you've got this bullet that the nose of it is meant to fill up with the pressure and push it open. But what might it go through beforehand? What if the person, San Diego, we don't really wear big, heavy clothing, but what if someone is, maybe it's a chilly night out, someone's got a big, heavy sweatshirt on, or big, fluffy jacket or something. Sometimes all of that stuff, that material will clog that nose, and it ends up acting like one of those FMJ, one of those covered nose bullets, and they don't expand. It'll just keep going down range and it doesn't expand. So now you have this bullet and you're like, well, it didn't expand, so I'm not sure if it went through the body or not. It depends on, you always have to look at the different substances that it went through first. If it went through a wall first, it might clog with drywall. These are 3 bullets that I shot into the water tank. And the very, very first one is just straight into the water tank. The other 2 are through some drywall, even though the drywall kind of washed off in there. So you can see that one partially expanded and the other didn't expand at all. So it really depends on what it goes through. But what's cool is, assuming that it doesn't get washed out in your water tank like that did, one of the things we can actually do is a bullet dissection. And basically the little hollow point clogs up with the material. And as it goes through, say it goes through some drywall and then some wood and then some fabric and then maybe the person, it will clog up in that order. So you can take this bullet and you can actually start dissecting it out. Now, if you have multiple trajectories at the scene and you have a trajectory that goes through a wall, some drywall and some wood and some fabric, you can again trace it back to this particular bullet. Sometimes this matters, sometimes it doesn't, but if you have multiple shooters and, say for instance, you have one where one guy shoots the person and the other one goes just to try to scare someone. They're both still criminals, but you may want to figure out which one did what, and we can figure out which bullet went through the wall, which one went through the body based on information like this. And I know I just say the body, I know that sounds super callous, but that's just mentally, I think sometimes when you do this stuff, you have to go the body, the target. It's just a mental thing. So bear with me if I let myself get too upset over it, then I can't function. So a few more interesting things about bullets. When they hit surfaces, they will deform based on the angle of impact. So orthogonal just means that the bullet hit straight on, 90 degrees each way, right? Any direction, 90 degrees. If it impacts straight on, it flattens the nose. But if it ricochets off something, it flattens the sides. So again, I can look at my trajectories and then I can look at my bullets and go, hey, the nose of this bullet's flattened. That's probably the one that hit straight on. Whereas this one, see how flat it is inside? I ricocheted this one off of a steel plate. And if you want to be highly entertained, you should go to the range while I'm doing these experiments. And the one that I was doing, I was there one time for this presentation out there at the police range, squatting down, shooting like just random objects like steel plates and things. But basically from far away, I'm just shooting the ground. I'm like squatting down, shooting the ground. And you've got my little ears on, and I turn around and I look and I see a whole line of police officers behind me, and they're all staring at me, looking at me like, what is this crazy lady doing? And I hear one girl go, she's from the lab. And they're like, oh, like, yeah, like, okay, we're all the crazy people. So, so yes, this is my version of science. I shoot things for science. Anyway, the other thing is if you get these ricochets with this smooth edge, you can also look and trace it back to a surface. So on this first one, it's a rough, unyielding target surface, meaning that this bullet not only ricocheted, I know that from the flat edge, it bounced. Ricochet means it like kind of hits at a steep angle and goes off. But it hit a rough surface. In this case, it was asphalt. And you can see that it's actually, I don't know if you guys can see my pointer here, but it's actually very rough. And if you had it, you can feel the texture of how rough it is because it scraped along asphalt or concrete or something that's like uneven. Versus this one in the middle right here, it hit a steel plate. So it's a smooth, unyielding surface. So there's no give, but it's nice and smooth. And it almost gives it, it's almost like a mirror shine to it. It just is very smooth and you can feel it again. It hits and it skims off. So if I have two bullets that were ricocheted, one off of steel, one off of asphalt, I can take both those bullets and match them back to the trajectories. Again, helps differentiate between shots. Maybe it's about sequence of shots, maybe it's about who fired which shots, but I can tell based on the shape of the bullet. This last one's interesting. It's called a yielding target surface, and the effect is described as the bow effect. And if you look carefully, it actually looks like the bullet is sandblasted. So this one is something that was essentially ricocheted through sand. So sand, gravel, any kind of surface that yielding, that gives a little bit like that. And typically I think of sand. It essentially sandblasts the bullet. So the bullet kind of digs in and then scoops up again. But that sandblasting, the reason it's called the bow effect is that it only is on the bottom portion of the bullet. So it comes up and drags around like the bow of a boat. If a boat's plowing through water, you see the wave come up along the edges. That's exactly what the sand does to the bullet. So it sandblasts half of it, which is awful for looking at microscopic marks, but it's a very cool effect that lets us trace back. Now, some other interesting things that you can tell about these bullets is if a bullet hits a hard surface, so it comes at a, so hard doing this on I don't even know if you guys can even see my little window here as I'm going, because I talk with my hands like crazy. If the bullet's coming and it hits a hard surface and at an angle enough to ricochet, it'll hit and then go skim real smooth. Or not smooth, like it hits at a steeper angle and then comes off on a very shallow angle, very close to the surface. But if it hits something that's a yielding surface, like sand, it hits and then it almost digs itself in, creates a ramp, and shoots up. So a hard yielding surface will hit and then the bullet skims along the surface. Something like sand, it digs in and scoops it up and ends up leaving at a very steep angle. So just kind of cool things that happen with trajectories. We talk about class characteristics a lot. Now, some of the things that people are more familiar with, when you're talking class versus individual characteristics, class characteristics means that it belongs to a group. So I always use this example. This is from a case of mine about, oh gosh, 12 years ago-ish. This, our suspect, murder for hire type case, and our suspect, this is his shoe, stepped in dog poop at the crime scene. So this is the cast I made of dog poop. It's a little hard to see. It's not a great photo, but it has Nike, it has the swoosh right here. You can see it. And it was a really exciting case when we found it. We're like, oh, you know, maybe it's the guy's shoe. And that's a class characteristic. You know, if the guy was wearing Converse or Vans or something like that, we'd immediately know, oh, it's not this shoe because it's not a Nike. That you can eliminate it. But just because he was wearing Nike, that's not the only Nike shoe in the whole world. There's other Nike shoes. So it's a class characteristic, meaning that it belongs to a particular group. And shoes have that, fingerprints have that, and so does firearms ammunition. Firearms have it, which gets important on the ammunition. So there's few things that you can do if you get to the crime scene. You can look at the bullets, you can look at the cartridge cases, and you can tell things about the gun without having a microscope, without having a firearms examiner there, just to give you those little groups of information. So one of the first things is the firing pin impression. And basically what that means, if you have an ammunition, right, you have your little cartridge case, when you pull the trigger, the firing pin goes forward, it hits the back of it, it hits the shock sensitive explosive called the primer. This is this gold ring right in here on the PMC, and then this one here on the Winchester, that big ring. That's the shock sensitive explosive. It creates a spark that travels through the cartridge case, which is what these are, ignites the gunpowder and causes the ammunition to fire. But the firing pin, the part that goes through and hits it, the firing pin and the firing pin aperture, depending on the firearm, are different shapes. So by far the most common is hemispherical, which is basically a circle. And that's this one on the left, this hemispherical one. But certain firearms, like Glocks, have different shapes. And in particular, Glock has an elliptical firing pin. You can kind of see this. It's sort of a rectangular aperture and an elongated elliptical firing pin in there. And that's very distinct. Now, it's not just Glocks that have it, but Glocks are by far the most common firearm that has it. So just by being at a crime scene, I can look around and I can see, you know, oh, this group has hemispherical firing pins, this group has elliptical firing pins, and I can already divide up shooters if I have shooters. And this is really helpful because a lot of police officers carry Glocks. So if you have an officer involved shooting, you can usually say, well, these are the police officers' guns, these are the suspects' guns, and kind of divide up the ammunition like that. Very helpful. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not multiple people with Glocks or multiple people with another firearm with hemispherical. I can't say that, but if you have one of each, you can at least start kind of separating out your shooters a little bit, and it's super helpful at a scene for reconstruction. Later on, you get your firearms examiner, someone like me, to come and look at it under the microscope and tell you specifically, yes, there's one shooter here, these cartridge cases match the gun. But just at the scene, you can start figuring it out. Another thing we can look at is rifling. And if you think about a bullet, it's kind of an elongated, modern ammunition. You can see right here, they're elongated shapes, kind of like a football. So we mostly like our football out here in San Diego. You know, I'm very sad that the Chargers left. Anyway, but if you think about a football, when a quarterback throws a football, they're not shot putting it, right? They're taking it and they're spinning it. They're basically rolling it off of their fingertips to give it a nice spin. And that's what makes it fly accurately and hopefully to your receiver way down the field. A firearm does the same thing. You want that bullet to fly accurately. You want it to go where you're shooting it at. So the way the firearm accomplishes that is that they have a set of called lands and grooves, but it's rifling. It goes down the barrel and it basically grabs that bullet, it digs in real tight, and it spins the bullet as it goes down and it twists it so it comes out and flies in a nice spiral. You know, just like you have quarterbacks that are left and right-handed, you have firearms that are left and right twist, meaning that some twist it to the right, which is most of them, and few of them twist it to the left. You can actually look at the bullet and tell which way it was twisted based on the lands and grooves, the markings on the bullet from the gun. So if you look, you can see these kind of stripes down here. Those are the marks, the impressions from the lands and grooves. on each side. But if you look real carefully, the ones here travel up and to the left. And the ones here travel up and to the right. So again, I can get two bullets. I can look and go, oh, this belongs to left twist firearm. This belongs to right twist firearm. I can start narrowing it down. If you have a left twist firearm, like a Colt or something at the scene, you can go, oh, yeah, this probably belongs to that versus a right twist firearm. The way I remember it, this is just my little memory trick here, is I look at the bullet, put it in my hand, and look at it, and I imagine I'm on a roller coaster, and this is my little roller coaster track. So whichever way I fall off, if I'm going to fall off to the right, it's a right twist. If I was to fall off to the left, it's a left twist. So I just look at the bullet, and it tells me it's a left or right twist. That's my way of remembering. So that's great. If you get a bullet, you can look at your bullet. But also what's kind of interesting is those ricochet, before I was talking about what the bullet looks like if it's ricocheted, but sometimes the ricochet marks themselves have different characteristics depending on the rifling of the firearm. So there's a couple ways. First thing is something called a chisholm trail. And basically, if you look at these, both of these, you imagine the bullet is going across the screen, the direction of the arrow. When that bullet hits and ricochets, it either is going to roll off to the left or roll off to the right, depending on if it's a left or a right twist bullet. And that last side stays in contact a little bit longer, that last shoulder. So you can imagine this right twist, this bullet is rolling, it's rolling to the right, and that kind of stays and gives it a little bit of a tail on the right side. In this case, it's the left twist, so it's rolling to the left and gives you a little bit of a tail on the left side. We can look at those and go, this is the right twist bullet, this is the left twist bullet, because it just stays in contact a little bit longer. And those are called Chisholm trails, after Jerry Chisholm, who's the criminalist who first wrote papers about this. If it digs in a little more, that's kind of its skims. There's something called the can opener effect, which is still the same idea. So in this case, it digs in and it rolls off to the right. You can see it really dramatic here. This rolls, if you can imagine the bullet going in that direction, digs in and then flips out to the right. In this case, it digs in and flips out to the left. Again, we can look at these ricochet marks. Now, where would this matter? Imagine you have a car, because this is a car hood, so this is what I got, and you have one guy on one side and one guy on the other, and they're shooting at each other. But when you get to the crime scene later, all you have is two guns, right, or bullets. Or maybe you don't even have the bullets. Maybe they went down range, but you've got these two guns, and you're going, okay, well, who's on which side? I'm trying to reconstruct the scene. Again, we're just doing baby little pieces. It's not telling the whole story, but I want to know which one was over here and which one was over there. I want to know who's standing where. Well, if someone has a left twist firearm and someone has a right twist firearm, I can start looking at these things and determining, well, this one came from the left twist firearm, and this one came from the right twist firearm, and I can start placing people within the scene based on the shape of these ricochet marks. One last way that this is helpful is something called I call it rifling transfer marks. I actually have no idea what this is called, but it's something that I studied for I went to they call it a Firearms Academy. It's a training, I sent through my work, but it's a training thing for firearms examiners. So this was my final project. And what you can see, remember those lands and grooves? Sometimes the lands and grooves will create an impression in the ricochet mark itself. So you can kind of see, I lost my pointer here. Oh, here we go. You can kind of see this mark right in here. That is actually an impression from the land and groove of the bullet. The only thing that's interesting is that always goes the opposite way. So this is a right twist bullet. You can see that it hits, here's your Chisholm trail where it trails off to the right if the bullet's going this way, but this land is going to the left. And the reason being, if you think about, you have your bullet, I guess that would be a right twist. What's on the back is left. They're always opposite, it's a spiral. So you always examine it from the top down and decide if it's left or right, but the underside is always going in the opposite direction. So you just have to reverse it in your brain if you're trying to decide if it's a left or right twist. So one more way that you can tell. All right, now the football analogy. tell I like football. I went to Penn State. You know, I like football. Anyway, so again, you got your quarterback. They throw that beautiful spiral. It's traveling so nice and pretty. And then what happens? Your defender jumps up and they tip the ball. And instead of going nice and straight, it starts tumbling. And it gets destabilized and kind of loses its spin and, you know, goes a little crazy. That happens to a bullet. When it ricochets, it kind of tips and then it starts tumbling. And when it tumbles, it goes into, we call it going into yaw, meaning that it loses that, you know, nice smooth axis before you've got a bullet traveling all nice and pretty, and now it's going all crazy. Once that happens, things can get a little weird. The bullet may not travel where you expect it to travel anymore. And so if something tips, instead of going, okay, the bullet tips, instead of going straight forward, it can come sideways and hit a little weird. And it ends up giving these bullet holes that are called keyhole shaped bullet holes. And this is another one of those things that I was shooting with the officers standing there looking at me like a crazy person. I was skipping rounds and trying to get them to go into the cardboard a little crazy. But the point is, if you see that, you look and go, well, wait, this isn't my primary impact. Meaning that if you're connecting bullet holes using trajectory rods, that's not your first one. It ricocheted off of something. So it's telling me to look for a ricochet. It's also telling me that connecting those holes might not give me a good trajectory. I want to look really for that first impact, because if it's doing this keyhole, it's going all squirrely, it's going all crazy. It might not be traveling in a straight line. Typically we do trajectories based on a straight line. The bullet hit here to here to here, it went nice and straight. As soon as it starts tumbling, it can get a little kooky. One of the funny questions that we sometimes have to ask ourselves is it a bullet hole? I put this in here after a case that someone else had, although this isn't our crime scene photo, but this is an example somebody else had given me. And basically the point of this to forensic people is we always call it apparent bullet holes unless we see the bullet on the other side, or we do some kind of chemical test to see if there's lead or copper or something in it. Because every once in a while you see something that looks like a bullet hole and it's not. So that was on a door. Someone slammed the door open really hard and hit this little knob right here, and it caused this beautiful looking bullet hole. So we do some things to check and see if it even is a bullet hole. One thing that people love, you know, the detectives especially, they always want us to measure the size of the bullet hole because they think that's going to tell us the size of the bullet, and it doesn't. And I thought that this was one of the things I thought was super interesting. I had no idea. But sometimes the bullet hole can be way bigger than the bullet, because when the bullet goes through, certain materials will just spread apart and stay really big. But other materials like rubber, if the bullet goes through, it'll squeeze through, and then that material contracts back down, and the bullet hole could actually be smaller than the bullet, which is pretty crazy. What changes a little bit more is if you have a hollow point, which we talked about earlier, that cavity, versus something, say, full metal jacket or something with a covered nose. The hollow points tend to act as a cookie cutter, so they will cut a hole, a much more perfect hole than something with a covered nose like an FMJ will squeeze through and it'll recollapse. So this is, the pictures are to the same scale of 9mm, same bullet, same gun actually. And this is how big, I don't know if the screen is to scale, but they're all to scale relative to each other. This is the difference in size of this bullet hole with a hollow point in rubber versus using the FMJ ammunition in rubber. It's less than half the size just because it's changing the type of ammunition. Over here it's through cardboard, and again the hollow point versus the FMJ. This doesn't contract down quite as much as the rubber does, but you can see that you really cannot measure this stuff and tell the size of the bullet. It's just, you just can't do it. Every once in a while, you come across weird things like gunshot residue profile patterns. Basically, if you fire a gun, gases come out of it. And typically, when we see these gases, it's because we're doing distance determination. We're looking at the bullet hole and it's surrounded by gases, and we're trying to figure out how far away the gun is. But sometimes you see the gas on the side of like a wall or something. It looks a little interesting, get a little pattern like that. And that's if you are right up against the wall. If you have a wall and then the gun, and the gases escape, instead of coming forward, you get some of that side thing. So this is actually me shooting a 44 Magnum, the Dirty Harry gun. I was very excited to get to shoot this. So we did some fancy photography to capture the flame that comes out of the firearm. I was very excited to shoot this. But you can see there's gases here and gases here, and you can actually overlay that on a pattern like this if you imagined there being a wall right next to me, which there's not in this picture. And sometimes if you have that profile pattern, this is not the same gun, but you get the gases here and the gases here, and you can tell the difference. You can tell about how long the barrel of the firearm is based on that. Caliber compatibility. I like to warn investigators that certain calibers of ammunition can be fired in the wrong caliber firearm. So if you're a gun person, you know pretty much 38 Special can be fired in a 357 Magnum, a 40 Smith & Wesson can be fired in 10 millimeter. Those are kind of common, but I like to let detectives know, because sometimes if people don't know and they get 38 Special ammunition and then they see a 357 Magnum firearm, they go, oh, it's the wrong caliber. Well, no, it actually can shoot there. But every once in a while, we get an incompatible matchup that still works. So when that happens, these cartridge cases warp and they bulge and they crack. And so sometimes you see these weird looking dented cartridge cases and the bolt looks all weird because it's bouncing down the barrel. But it is sometimes possible to fire the wrong ammunition or in a firearm. And that does happen to us every once in a while, because a lot of people who commit crimes don't exactly go to the store to buy their guns and ammunition. So it's whatever they steal. And then, you know, does it fit? Yeah, sure, it fits, it works, and they shoot it. And we get all kinds of weird stuff. And we need to be able to tell, because if we get something that looks like this, again, we want to tell the detectives, yes, this says 9 millimeter Luger on the ammunition, but you're probably looking for a 40 Smith & Wesson, because this wasn't shot in a 9 millimeter. All right. Any questions, you guys? I'm happy to talk. I know it's a little bit more technical without explaining a whole lot of the background behind it, but I just was hoping that it'd be something you find interesting, a little different than your typical forensic talks. I wanted to get a little bit more involved in technical, so.
This is great. And we do have some questions, so I'm just going to start reading some off for you. So you talked about bullet ricocheting. Is it easy to find those bullets, or because we might think that they just fly so far away that we can't even find?
It depends. There are times we can't find bullets, whether they ricochet or not. Sometimes they just go way down and never to be found again, you know, especially if you're out by a field or someone shooting down a street. Typically, eventually we'll get it, because I'm city of San Diego, so we don't quite have as much open land as, say, the county does out in, if you have a shooting out in Borrego Springs or something, it's probably lost forever in the desert. But for us, there's usually some kind of house or car a little bit further down that at some point somebody's going to call up and say, hey, I got a bullet hole in my car door. What happened? And we'll come find it if we don't find it initially. So it does happen. The ricochets themselves can be difficult to find. Again, if they're off of somebody's car or something that's pretty identifiable, but if they're off, say, the street, it's a little hard to tell. So we do have chemical tests. If we suspect that something might be a ricochet, we can use chemical tests to, it doesn't absolutely confirm, but it'll give us a positive indication that's probably a ricochet mark. But it's not always possible. We just do the best we can.
That brings us to another question, because Karen was asking, do you ever do chemical analysis on gunshot residue, and what can you learn from that analysis?
Yes, no, it kind of depends. I've realized that gunshot residue is one of those things. There's actually two different kinds that people talk about. So there's gunshot residue, it's called primer gunshot residue, that gets on the shooter's hand. So if they want to test to see if someone, not so much if they fired a gun, but if they handled a gun, what they can do is they take these little sticky pads and they stick, and they collect any potential gunshot residue on the person's hand, goes to a trace evidence unit. They have something called a scanning electron microscope, an SEM, and they can put that little pad underneath there and they can identify gunshot residue from that. On the other hand, there's also the gunshot residue, and I showed you those pictures with the black puffs of smoke coming out and all the gases and everything coming out of the barrel. That is also gunshot residue, but this time coming down the barrel, coming out of the barrel, and we use that for totally different purposes. What we do is distance determination. So basically, if someone's shot, or a target or a thing or a wall, whatever, is shot at close range, within, say, 3 feet, all the gas, the gunpowder particles, the unburnt particles are gonna, all that soot, all the stuff comes out of the barrel. You saw that flame coming out. That's made up of burnt and unburnt gunpowder particles, soot, all the stuff. And it will hit the surface and it clouds it. So up close, you get like kind of this sooty ring. And then as you get further and further away, the soot kind of disappears, but you get these little gunpowder particles that sort of embed and hit it. And it creates a very distinct pattern. If you keep the ammunition and the firearm the same, you can recreate this pattern at different distances. We'll actually take the firearm and the ammo and we'll shoot contact 2 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches, all the way back. And we can do comparisons and say about how far away the muzzle of the gun was from the target. Chemical tests come to play in that we can use the chemical tests to get a better look at these things. Now, if it's clear enough, we don't need them, but say the person, the victim, was wearing a black shirt or something like that. It might be very hard to see black gunpowder particles, but we can do chemical tests, and we actually can literally lift it off of the shirt. We take filter paper and we soak it and we put it on there and we lift the chemical off, and we can do distance determine that way using chemical reactions to the gunpowder to create these patterns.
Amazing. And then we also have a question. They're thinking that this was probably a case study when you went to forensic school. I know that's not the term for it, but let's call it forensic school. Was there a shooter on the grassy knoll?
You guys asked my favorite question, and you know it's one of my favorite questions. You know, it's funny what I guess for me being in this field, I've been fascinated by the JFK shooting. You know, since I was little, I just thought it was so cool, and I watched every conspiracy theory. And so a few years back, some of the top shooting reconstructionists in the world, it's father-son team, Mike and Luke Haig, they did a reconstruction of that shooting. And there's a whole Nova special if you're interested in it. It's Nova search JFK shooting, and then their name is Haig, H-A-A-G. I'm telling you, Google it, find it, it's fascinating. But they did this whole thing examining it, and they came to the conclusion that again, reconstructionists were very annoying. We don't tell whole stories, but they came to the conclusion that there was one, that the shooter was coming from the book depository, and it was not the grassy knoll. And they go through and explain why they think that is. And I didn't know up until that time, but they have me convinced. And I actually got to see, I know them personally, just from conferences and training classes. I've taken them classes with them. And they have me completely convinced. I watched them go through all the science, like in a full day of presentation about this. And I was just fascinated. It was very cool. So now I do believe that they were from the shooters from the book depository and not from the grassy knoll.
All right, they convinced you. Got to look for that. So it was on Nova, if anybody interested, and the name of the specialist is H-A-A-G. So if you're interested in that, it seems to be a good one. We have another question for you. Do you spend as much time providing evidence as to what things aren't as much as what they are?
I'm sorry, what things aren't?
Yeah, so do you spend as much time providing evidence of this was not it, but this was it?
I mean, it's always just dependent on the case. So, but I have plenty of things where I turn around and go, nope, you got the wrong gun. You've got the wrong whatever. So yeah, I don't, it's actually, when I say something is an identification, now we're talking firearms comparison because I put stuff under the microscope. but even Reconstruction, you can't be wrong. That's probably one of the more stressful parts of the job, is there's really no such thing as being wrong here. I can't, if I say that this bullet came from this gun and it didn't, I've just potentially put an innocent person in jail. I can't have that. I can't do that. Not to mention it destroys my career, but that's almost secondary to putting an innocent person in jail. I would rather let a guilty person go than put an innocent person in jail anytime. So there are times when I look at it, it's like, oh, this is absolutely not the gun. And then there's times I'm looking and I'm going, it looks good. I think it probably is, but I can't say. We never use scientific terms of certainty, but just for just speaking terms, I can't say for certain that it's this person. So I'll back it down and say, well, this is inconclusive. I can't tell you. And that happens a lot too. And it's so frustrating because it's like, I know it probably is, but I can't, I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to take that stuff and put it down unless I absolutely am sure that it's the gun. So there's plenty of times that you go, no, I can't tell you, or even no, it's completely not the gun at all. So.
And that brings me to another question. When we watch TV shows about crime scene, and then they go to the court and present the evidence, and they always present the evidence as, this is it, like this is 100% what happened. Is that how you do it when you are on stand?
No.
I mean, you just said you can't do it, but are you asked in the stand to do that, to say yes or no?
Most attorneys know better than to try to make us do that, but you'll get people who push you. And I cannot say 100% certainty, because scientifically, I can't say that no other gun out there that has been made, will ever be made, will give me these exact marks. I cannot say that. Same with DNA, all the stuff that but we do these studies, and what we can say is we've never, for firearms, it's like 150 years that we've been studying this, we've yet to find two guns that has made the same marks. We try. We literally go to factories and we get one firearm off the other, same machines made one right after the other. It's as close as you can possibly get, and still they're different. So statistically speaking, we cannot say, you can never say 100% certainty, just statistically speaking, but we get as close as we can get to that. So we tend to say to a practical certainty, meaning we've never found a gun in 150 years of examination. We've never found two guns that look this much alike, and the odds that, we don't say odds, but just, essentially the odds of this being that one random time that it happened, just happens to be this poor guy's gun and he's not really the suspect, it's pretty small. So scientific certainty is where we go with it.
Wonderful.
Or practical certainty, sorry.
Yeah. All right, we're just about at time, 8 o'clock, and I know you need to get back to class and make sure that your students do all the stuff that you told them to.
A few extra minutes. So,
okay, good. Perfect. Thank you so much for doing the talk with us tonight. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us and for asking such good questions. We love it. I hope we'll see you again for other Sharp Minds talks, or for Citizen Science talks, or for Sky Tonight. And if you have any questions that we couldn't answer tonight, then you've got my email address, and I'll see if Toniann can answer that for us retrospectively, and I'll email you the answer. Thank you so much, everybody. And thanks for taking the poll. If you haven't taken it yet, I'm going to leave it up for another minute, but I'll say goodbye to Toniann. Thank you so very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Have a great night. Thank you.
See you too. Bye.
Bye. If you haven't taken the poll yet, take a minute, and I will end it in just a second, but I'll give you another minute or so. And I'm going to stop the recording. There we go.